I got tired of seeing the movies where, oh, they're gonna do the lights now tonight. They're sending so and so to the last mile, and there's always a brother with extra Vaseline standing at the bar. What have been percolating for a long time was we ought to stand up and it is freedom.
September 2021. The news broke quietly. Melvin Van Peebles, pioneering filmmaker, father of black cinema, has died at his Manhattan home. The press called him an icon. Hollywood posted a few lines of remembrance, then went silent. Van Peebles was no ordinary director. He was a doorbreaker, the first black man to make a film Hollywood called dangerous for America. He dared to challenge the system by openly telling the story of a black man who could beat the white cop and survive. Just for that, America considered him a threat. COINTELPRO placed informants. The FBI opened files. For decades, Hollywood made billions from the cool black images he invented. But the name Melvin Van Peebles was reduced to a footnote, godfather of Blaxploitation. A title that sounded flashy but was actually a polished tombstone for a stolen revolution. So this story isn't just about a director. It's how a system buries a revolutionary not with bullets but with calculated silence. Chicago, 1930s. A smog-choked industrial city. Train whistles and division carved into every wall. On August 21, 1932, Melvin Van Peebles was born on the South Side where black people crowded into crumbling housing. America was still racked by racism and the looming storm of World War II. His father, Edwin Peebles, was a black tailor working in the basement of the family apartment. At 10, Melvin had to help him cleaning machines, folding cloth, picking up pins. The family lived on 58th Street between Calumet and Prairie. Later, Melvin would call it the hardest place in America at that time. Their police rarely showed up. Screams, fights, and gunshots were every day. He once said, "I saw 9 people get killed before I turned 12. Down there, a gun was not just a sound, it was the pulse of life." For Melvin, 58th Street was his first school of real America, the place that taught him that justice did not deal equally in every color. Though poor, his parents believed education was the ticket out. In 1950, he graduated from Thornton Township High School, then earned a scholarship to Ohio Wesleyan University, a white college in conservative Ohio. Walking onto campus, Melvin was one of the few black students. His classmates regarded him like a strange object. Teachers avoided his eyes. In English literature class, they discussed Shakespeare and Whitman, while Melvin thought about neighbors being evicted because they couldn't afford rent. By day, he lived among educated people. At night, he took the train back to the poor neighborhood, 2 worlds, 2 truths, and neither fully accepting him. "I lived 2 lives," he said. "One inside the white books, one inside the black streets." In 1953, Melvin earned his Bachelor of Arts. Just 13 days later, he joined the U.S. Air Force, one of the few safe escapes for educated black youth. But even in uniform color was a wall. White officers ate apart, slept apart, spoke apart. Leaving the service, Melvin returned home with his degree and a few medals and nobody waiting for him. No film studio hired black screenwriters. No news outlet hired black editors. So he moved to San Francisco, lived in a tiny room, and worked as a cable car gripman, a tough job with steel brakes that burned his hands. He said, "I don't have the money to make films. I only have stories and a rage no one wants to hear." This was when America was toasting the white dream. Hollywood had no space for a black director. Every script with a black character was still written by a white person. Melvin saw it. If he couldn't walk into the system, he would invent another. Leaving America in search of voice. San Francisco, mid-1960s. Van Peebles left the US for the Netherlands, then France, carrying only a few manuscripts and the belief that Europe cares less about your color than your talent. In Paris, he lived in a small attic apartment, wrote the novel La Permission in French. The story told of a black American soldier granted 3 days leave who falls in love with a white French woman. A seemingly small story, but at that moment, it struck like a punch to Hollywood's racial system. When the novel was published, he decided to film it himself. The Story of a 3-Day Pass, 1967. The only American America refused to see. He wrote the script, directed, and edited The Story of a 3-Day Pass himself. The film was shot in France in French, using amateur actors and natural light. When it was finished, he submitted it to the San Francisco Film Festival, and unexpectedly, it was selected to screen at the Cannes Film Festival in 1967. Cahiers du Cinéma, France's most respected film journal, hailed Melvin as a true American filmmaker in the body of an African exile. European critics called him the new face of American cinema. While the story of a 3-day pass was being celebrated across Europe, America barely knew his name. The US didn't see him, but Europe had just witnessed the birth of a pioneer. The man once dismissed as an outsider now had a voice fierce, independent, and unapologetically angry. Melvin Van Peebles had found something America never gave him the freedom to tell his own story. In 1969, Columbia Pictures handed him a script titled Watermelon Man. The original draft by Herman Raucher was a light satire about a white man who wakes up one morning to discover he's turned black. Melvin rewrote nearly the entire film. The original ended happily, the protagonist turning white again. Melvin fought to keep a different ending. The man remains. Black embraces it and walks away from his white family and world. He went head-to-head with Columbia's censors, the same system that had long diluted black voices. The film was a success. Critics praised it. Audiences filled theaters. Columbia smelled money and offered Melvin a 3-picture deal, a dream most Hollywood directors chased their whole careers. But he turned it down. He walked out of Columbia alone with no budget, no studio. That walkout changed everything. A year later, he returned with a film Hollywood would call dangerous for America, The Uprising. Sweetback's Badass song 1971, the film that brought Hollywood to its knees. In 1970, Melvin Van Peebles decided to return to America. The Black Power movement was rising, yet Hollywood was still entirely controlled by white executives. Studios had started exploiting rebellious black imagery to sell tickets, but never allowed real black artists behind the camera. Melvin looked around and saw the truth. They want to sell black culture, but they don't want black people telling the story. He set out to do what no one else dared, a fully independent film, written, directed, edited, produced, and starred in by a black man. A story about a black rebel fighting back against the white system. No studio would finance it. The project was labeled too black, too angry, too dangerous. When banks refused loans, Melvin used his savings and borrowed $50,000 from Bill Cosby, the only person who believed in him. Cosby demanded no creative credit. That loan, nearly a third of the total budget, saved the film from collapse. Melvin titled it Sweetback's Badass song, inspired by street culture and the raw pulse of funk, a film unlike anything Hollywood had ever seen. The story followed Sweetback, a black man working in a nightclub, beaten and framed by white police. When he witnesses another young black man brutalized, Sweetback snaps, attacking the officers and going on the run. His flight becomes a symbol of an entire race's fight for survival. Melvin directed and starred in it himself, shot it with old cameras, edited it in a tiny apartment, and composed the soundtrack with a little-known group called Earth, Wind & Fire before they became famous. The film was completed in just 19 days on a shoestring $150,000 budget. When finished, no theater dared screen it. The ratings board branded it X adults only, effectively banning minors and blocking distribution. Some theaters even cut 9 minutes of footage, fearing the film was too black, too anti-police. But Melvin refused to quit. He rented theaters in Detroit and Atlanta himself, plastering handmade posters that read "Rated X" by an all-white jury. It was more than marketing, it was rebellion. The message spread like wildfire. Black audiences flooded theaters' lines wrapping around city blocks. In just 2 weeks, the film grossed over $190,000 more than its entire budget. By the end of its independent run, it earned $15 million nationwide, about $110 million today. A film made by a single black man, banned and dismissed by Hollywood, became the highest-grossing independent movie in America at the time. Sweetback didn't flinch. It struck nerves the country had long buried. The film's so raw, it left audiences speechless. From its very first frame, Sweetback's Badass song shocked America. The film opened with the childhood of Sweetback, played by Melvin's real-life son, Mario Van Peebles, only 13 years old at the time. The scene depicted a boy violently pulled into the adult world, cruel, trapped, and stripped of innocence. It was so visceral and unfiltered that many theaters blurred or cut it entirely upon release. When asked about the production years later, Melvin half joked, half sighed, "I caught gonorrhea during the shoot. I filed for workman's comp and used the money to buy more film." Many scenes were shot without rehearsals, without simulations, giving the film an unnerving sense of reality. The Los Angeles Times described audience reactions to that sequence as stunned silence, as if they had just witnessed something no one dared to name. Conservatives accused him of using shock instead of art. Some critics called it reckless audacity, claiming Melvin risked moral boundaries in the name of truth. Melvin faced harsh criticism at the time, especially for allowing his own son to appear in such a controversial scene. But in hindsight, critics from Criterion, The Guardian, and The New York Times saw it differently. They viewed the shocking imagery as a social metaphor, a reflection of how America had stripped black innocence from birth. Their childhoods were stolen, their spirits robbed by division and inequality. It was not exploitation, but a visual indictment, a protest delivered through images rather than words. But the truth is, Melvin had sparked a real revolution. Just weeks after Sweetback premiered, Huey P. Newton, leader of the Black Panther Party, publicly praised the film, calling it the first cinematic document of Black America, a visual manifesto declaring that we will not die in silence. Black newspapers across the country hailed Melvin as the cinematic hero of the Black Power movement. The film's explosive success made Melvin Van Peebles one of the most powerful men in the black artistic community, but it also made him a target. Top secret. The FBI file in 1971, only a few months after Sweetback's Badass song shook America, the FBI opened an investigation on Melvin Van Peebles. The name Sweetback echoed through black neighborhoods and inside the federal offices of Washington, D.C. It rang like a national security alert. According to declassified files released in 2019 by The Guardian and the FBI archives, Melvin Van Peebles was listed as a person of interest under COINTELPRO, the government's covert surveillance and infiltration program designed to disrupt black movements deemed radical. In an internal memo declassified in 2019, FBI agents wrote, "The film Sweetback is being used by extremist groups as propaganda. Audiences in Oakland and Chicago are responding enthusiastically. Continued surveillance is advised to prevent further spread." The FBI saw the film as a potential uprising, one that could spread not through the streets, but through the consciousness of Black America. COINTELPRO, the same government program that had targeted Malcolm X Martin Luther King Jr., and the Black Panthers began monitoring screenings of Sweetback. Agents recorded audience lists, photographed license plates, and filed weekly reports on public reaction. One report noted hundreds of black spectators shouted and cheered as the protagonist struck back at the police. To the FBI, this was no longer a movie. It was revolutionary material, a work of art treated as a political weapon. Worse still, Melvin Van Peebles' name was added to the same watch list as Huey P. Newton, Angela Davis, and Eldridge Cleaver, the Black Panther leaders deemed domestic threats. On the movie screens of white America, he was the X-rated director. In FBI files, he was labeled a danger. No one was arrested. No police ever stormed a set. But Melvin Van Peebles understood he was under surveillance now. His honesty, his refusal to compromise, had made him a thorn in the side of power. Soon the IRS opened an investigation accusing him of violating film export laws, a flimsy excuse meant only to harass him. No studios would fund him. No distributors would touch his work. But he kept writing, kept composing, kept fighting. Years later, when COINTELPRO files were declassified, scholars finally discovered how closely Sweetback had been tracked, as if it were an armed revolution. The Criterion Collection would later describe it as the most politically surveilled film in American history. And that was the terrifying truth. A small, self-financed film by one black man had made the entire U.S. power structure tremble. In 1971, Sweetback's Badass song was recognized as the most politically influential film of the 1970s. Across Europe, it was screened at major festivals, Rotterdam and Locarno among them, where Melvin Van Peebles was celebrated as the father of American revolutionary cinema. Though never nominated for an Oscar due to its X-rating, critics would later set the record straight. The New York Times 1999 called it the film that gave birth to independent black cinema. Time magazine 2005 named it among the 25 most important films about race in American history. And in 2020, the Library of Congress enshrined Sweetback's Badass song in the National Film Registry, preserving it as a work of cultural, historical, and aesthetic significance. From a tailor's son in Chicago to an exile in Paris, Melvin Van Peebles became the man who changed Hollywood forever. A $150,000 film forced a billion-dollar industry to confront its own reflection. He didn't just make movies, he liberated the black voice from the mold it was forced into. When Sweetback's Badass song exploded like a bomb, Hollywood panicked and then it copied him. The system that stole the Black Rebellion. Hollywood, the same people who once said no one wants to see black films, suddenly realized something: black culture sells. Within just 2 years after Sweetback, major studios like MGM, Warner Bros., and Paramount began flooding the market with a new wave of so-called Blaxploitation movies. Shaft 1971, Superfly 1972, Coffee 1973, Foxy Brown 1974. Guns, drugs, beautiful women, funk music, cool, fearless black heroes, fighting cops driving Cadillacs wrapped in bright leather jackets. At first glance, it seemed like a golden age for black characters on screen. But behind the camera, 90% of the directors, writers, and producers were white. What did they do? They took the revolutionary spirit of Sweetback and drained it. They kept the glamour, but removed the politics. They kept the rebellion, but turned it into a product. They kept the funk, but silenced the cry for freedom. Melvin reacted fiercely. He said, "They see black dollars, not black souls. I made Sweetback to liberate, and they made Shaft to sell tickets." Now, black characters were allowed to be cool, but still trapped in stereotypes: the charming criminal, the flashy hustler, the gun-toting hero. They were no longer real black men, just Hollywood's commercial version of rebellion. While Sweetback was censored and labeled dangerous, its watered-down copies were praised as a bold new movement. The rebellion Melvin started was eventually bought, rebranded, and sold worldwide by Hollywood itself. What he created to free the black spirit, the system turned into a formula, a way to profit from the black body. By the late 1970s, Melvin had become an exile in his own country. He released the funk jazz album Ain't Supposed to Die a Natural Death, followed by a series of independent works, novels, short stories, and screenplays. While Hollywood drowned in commercialized black films like Shaft and Superfly, Melvin kept his distance, watching the system steal the language of rebellion he had created and turn it into entertainment. Melvin Van Peebles didn't just fight the system, he also fought poverty, injustice, and the loneliness that comes with being first. Wealth, paradox, and pain. After the massive success of Sweetback's Badass song 1971, the first independent black film to gross over $10 million on a $150,000 budget, Melvin should have become a millionaire, a pioneering black film mogul. But reality was different. The Hollywood distribution system was almost entirely controlled by white corporations. Even though the film was a hit, Melvin had to chase down every dollar himself, since many distributors refused to pay or deliberately delayed payment. In one interview, he said bitterly, "Black people create the value. Other people keep the money." That was the greatest paradox of his life, the man who paved the way for the entire Blaxploitation movement, turning black cinema into a cultural force, never became rich. He didn't build a studio, didn't start a franchise, didn't own a company. He lived like a wandering artist, making films, writing music, painting trading stocks, and hustling to survive. His net worth was never officially reported, but media outlets estimated it at only a few $100,000, a small figure compared to the cultural impact he created. Still, Melvin never saw that as failure. "I didn't make films to get rich," he said. "I made them so black people would know they could." The path for a new generation. During the 1980s and 1990s, young filmmakers like Spike Lee, John Singleton, Robert Townsend, and his own son, Mario Van Peebles, publicly called Melvin the spiritual father of black cinema. He collaborated with Mario on Posse 1993, a black western, and appeared in several independent projects as a living cultural icon. In 2003, Mario made Badass, a biopic about his father's journey in creating Sweetback. Melvin co-produced and guided his son through portraying his own past. The film won major awards at Sundance and the Independent Spirit Awards, solidifying his legacy in film history. Melvin left behind more than 20 films, 3 novels, 2 Broadway musicals, dozens of albums, and countless artists influenced by his work. Hollywood called him the godfather of black cinema. But in truth, Melvin Van Peebles was more than that. He was the man who taught Hollywood its most painful lesson: you don't need permission to tell the truth. If Melvin Van Peebles' life were a movie, the private life chapter would be the quietest. He didn't drown in fame, didn't collapse under scandal. Private life and marriage, the man who never fit the mold. In 1956, when he was barely in his 20s, Melvin married Maria Marx, a German photographer. The marriage marked a major turning point in his life. He left America and moved to Europe. In Paris, among the cobblestone streets and smoky cafes, they raised 3 children, Mario, Megan, and Max. Mario, the eldest, would later become a filmmaker himself, carrying on his father's legacy with works like New Jack City, a 1991. Maria and Melvin were once considered an international artist couple. She took photos, he made films. Together they roamed across Europe with a camera and a notebook. But that freedom also carried cracks. As Melvin sank deeper into the world of filmmaking and endless creative adventures, their marriage began to fall apart. He would later admit, "I loved her, but I loved freedom more." After their divorce, Melvin never remarried. His life was marked by brief romances with actresses, models, and collaborators on film projects. He was known for his charm, intelligence, and an almost magnetic presence. Yet he never hid his fear of commitment. "Marriage is a contract with society," he once said, "and I don't sign contracts with society." From then on, Melvin lived like a nomad, always moving, always creating, always loving, but never belonging to anyone. In his small lower Manhattan apartment cluttered with scripts, instruments, and old film reels, he lived alone for decades. Friends said he stayed in touch with Maria until the end, called his children every birthday, and loved art as if it were the only thing that never betrayed him. Old age and his final years. Old age came to Melvin not as an illness, but as a quiet visitor. He rarely spoke about his health, but the hands that once held cameras, wrote music, and edited films began to tremble slightly as he entered his 80s. Still, he continued to attend lectures, film retrospectives, and public discussions. In 2010, the French government awarded him the Chevalier de la Légion d'honneur, an honor his own country never thought to give. A black man who had to leave America only to be knighted by another nation. That was a silent yet profound irony. On September 21, 2021, Melvin Van Peebles passed away at his home in Manhattan. He was 89. The family never disclosed the cause, only saying he passed peacefully surrounded by music and the people he loved. There was no grand funeral, no dramatic farewell. Yet across social media, thousands of artists from Spike Lee to Questlove Common and Barry Jenkins paid tribute. Spike Lee posted a smiling photo of Melvin with the caption, "Without him, there is no me." Thank you, OG. That single line summed up an entire legacy. After his passing, the Criterion Collection released Melvin Van Peebles' essential films. MoMA and several universities held retrospectives. Everyone called him the godfather of black cinema. Legacy and influence, the rebel who changed cinema forever. Before 1971, in American cinema, black characters had only 2 fates: to be funny or to die early. After Sweetback's Bodice song, they gained a third to survive. Melvin redefined what it meant to be a black character on screen. No longer sidekicks, no longer victims, but people who fought back and reclaimed their own narrative. His film forced Hollywood to learn how to speak and listen to black audiences. But Melvin's influence went far beyond cinema. His philosophy of do-it-yourself, speak for yourself, live for yourself, became part of the DNA of hip-hop, funk, and street art throughout the 1980s and 1990s. Rappers like Ice-T, Public Enemy, Tupac, and Kanye West have all cited Melvin as an icon of the black freedom aesthetic art, born from struggle, sweat, and defiance. His 1971 funk album, Ain't Supposed to Die a Natural Death, is widely regarded as a precursor to spoken word rap where music and politics collided as one. Critics called it the soundtrack of urban struggle. And notably, Earth, Wind & Fire, who collaborated with Melvin on Sweetback, went on to become legends of soul and funk around the world. Today, universities like NYU, UCLA, Howard, and Harvard all teach courses titled The Cinema of Melvin Van Peebles. He is credited with pioneering the concept of the black gaze, the idea that black people should see themselves through their own lens, not through images crafted by white filmmakers. Before Melvin, black characters existed on screen, only to be looked at. After Melvin, they looked back. He reversed the power of the camera, turning it into a weapon of resistance. When Criterion restored his complete works in 2021, they wrote, "Melvin didn't just make movies, he rewired the language of American cinema." Ironically, it wasn't until he was in his 80s that Hollywood finally began to say his name out loud. In 2010, MoMA and Criterion organized Melvin Van Peebles' Essential Films Retrospective. A decade later, in 2020, Sweetback was added to the National Film Registry, the highest honor a film can receive in the United States. From a poor kid on Chicago's South Side to an exile watched by the FBI from a man Hollywood rejected, to a name carved into its history, Melvin Van Peebles proved that art could be a form of war. If you believe the truth can be more terrifying than any film, hit like, comment, and subscribe, because in the next episode we'll uncover another secret Hollywood tried to bury. And this one is even darker than you think.
All data, analysis, and commentary in this video are presented based on information available at the time of production. The content is subject to change over time and should not be considered a definitive forecast.
There is still so much more to explore: stories of resilience, legacy, and truth. Feel free to dive into some of our top recommended videos now appearing on your screen.